Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Office of Tax Appeals. I am Tommy Leung, and I am the lead judge for today's meeting. Sitting with me are Hearing Officer Erica Parker and Judge Steve Kim. We together will be equal participants in making the decision in this appeal. Some housekeeping matters before we go on the record. Um, Lynn Alonso is our legal stenographer, and she will be preparing a verbatim transcript of today's hearing. Once the transcript is completed, it will be placed on OTA's webpage. For purposes of the transcript and for everybody else, we request that everybody speak clearly at a normal pace. Please do not talk over each other. And best practice is to mute your microphones when not speaking. This hearing is being live streamed. So any personal information that you might mention will be broadcast over the air. A couple more things. The issue remains the 2020 late filing penalty and interest abatement. Is that correct, Mr. Walker?
That is correct.
Okay, and Mr. Tuttle, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, very good. And at this point, I'm gonna go on the record. And today's date is February 20th, 2025. It is approximately 1:10 p.m. This is the appeal of Impact Automation, docket number 2303-12813. Prior to today's hearing, the parties agreed to the following : Number one, that this hearing be held electronically. Number two, that the taxable years at issue is 2020. Number three, the issues to be decided are whether the late filing penalty and interest for the 2020 tax year are to be abated. And number four, the amount in controversy is $37,178.75, and this is a refund appeal. Sitting with me on the panel today are hearing officers Erica Parker and Stephen Kim. Will the parties please introduce themselves, starting with the taxpayer, Mr. Wargo?
Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Wargo. I'm calling you from Columbia, Maryland, halfway between Baltimore and Washington. And it is about 30 degrees out. And we're enjoying this nice winter day. Judge, you mentioned the $37,000 penalty. At the time, the state has not presented me with the interest owed on that penalty.
Okay, we'll let the franchise tax board address that when they start making their presentation.
Very good.
So just hold your horses.
Sure.
For the franchise tax board, please introduce yourselves.
Hello, my name is Topher Tuttle, representing Franchise Tax Board.
Hello. And
my name is Maria Brosterhouse, also
Good
from the Franchise Tax Board.
good afternoon, Mr. Brosterhouse and Ms. Brosterhouse. Mr. Wago, we've agreed to have you. We've also prior to today's hearing, exhibits parties. The franchise tax board had exhibits A through K, and Impact Automation had exhibits 1 through 5. Neither party objected to each party's exhibits, and they are now being admitted into evidence and as part of the record. So get that out of the way. Mr. Wago, before you begin your presentation, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Wago, you have 15 minutes for your presentation and 5 minutes for rebuttal if desired. And of course, there's no need for you to use all 15 minutes if you don't need it. So please begin at your pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Judge. If it's okay, I was going to share my screen, and I just want to take the board through the documents and the timelines on what's happened and where we are right now.
Of course, like I said before, this is going live over the air, so
Okay.
there you go.
Well, very good. Here, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and um, I'll just talk through. I'll talk through my position. Can everyone see a PowerPoint right now? The PowerPoint says introduction, Steve Wargo, Columbia, Maryland.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, well, greetings again from Maryland. My name is Steve Wargo. I'm a small business owner. I started Impact Automation with my wife in 2018, and I set off on small business adventure. I'm an engineer by schooling, first in my family to go to college, and I don't mind paying my fair share of taxes. We live in a great country, and I need to pay my share just like everyone else. And I'm here by myself. There's no lawyer, there's no accountant. I'm just the taxpayer asking for forgiveness in light of the circumstances. So I'll tell you my story. At the end, there's really, I think, 3 reasons I'm making this appeal. And those 3 reasons are it really comes down to there was no willful intent. It was a very difficult business environment in 2020 and 2021 with COVID. And I'm asking for forgiveness because of this case. The California state held up my refund for 2021 for almost 2.5 years, took many, many phone calls and to get that released. And that really that was really hard for us to be without that cash for that period of time. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we do, and then I'll give you a timeline of where we were at. So why is this Maryland guy and this Maryland company filing in California to begin with? What we do is we provide automation in those years to the US Post, and we were working in Sacramento, in West Sac, trying to get the mail out of the building during COVID. So we had a large contract. We worked in California, in Sacramento, and we were trying to move that mail to the parcel sorting machines and then back out of the building so Californians could get their mail processed. And it was a very difficult time. And there were active cases of COVID in the plant, in the facility, but we were working and doing our installation to help move the mail. This letter is one of our exhibits, just to document that that's what we were doing in 2020, and that led to in 2021, that led to our tax filings. We've shared with the court, this was the tax return we did file, and you'll see January 2021. That's when that was filed with the state of California. Taxes were due September 15th. I got a tax package this thick from my accountants, an inch thick. On page 63, page 62, it said, hey, we've overpaid California that year, but that was on my 100S. I didn't see my 540 NR, which said I needed to send in a big check and the tax returns in September. This was overlooked. When I discovered it, we filed in January of 2021. We sent you a check and we sent it FedEx because we wanted it there the next day. That was self-discovery and self-reporting. This is, I'd switched accountants. It's a new business, and those tax returns came in late. We received a notice in February from the state that said, and I can make this a little bit larger, but we owed a total of $259,000. They had processed, I guess, that tax return and said we are short. We started the appeal process, where we started the discussion process with the state through our accountants in 2022 to try to come up with what do we actually owe, and so we can get this behind us. We also received a notice on July 12th. Now the balance due said we owed $169,000 from the state. So as July is going on, we received that notice. In September, we got another notice from the state that said, hey, here's your penalty, here's your interest, here's the adjustments. You owe us $14,000. And we said, okay, that seems reasonable. We paid that immediately. So that was our second payment toward 2020. When we paid that balance, we paid what we thought was the penalty and interest. And at that point, we applied for a refund, and we filled out your reasonable cause form. Just through the timeline, I know it's not 2020, but in September, we paid what we thought was 2020. In October, the state said, hey, we've got a big refund coming your way for 2021. So we called in and said, yep, that's our refund. This is a legit tax refund. We're a legit business. But this was held up for almost 2.5 years because I'm not quite sure all the details why, but that refund, we expected that to be released, and it never was released until many, many calls and emails, and we had an advocate working on our behalf. So I don't know all the California laws, but I know that was not released to us for 2.5 years. And a small business, that's a lot of money that we're out. So we did the appeal for 2020, and we sent that in. That appeal was denied on 12/12 by the state. February of 2023, the state said, hey, you've got a new balance due. We've just looked at your taxes and you owe us $157,000 now. Wow, I thought we were good in the summer, but obviously we were not good. So we had a revised balance that came across. So paid our accountants to look into this. While we were doing that, in March, we appealed the decision that we couldn't receive an adjustment. And that's what led us to this meeting today. So in February, when the state said, hey, we don't have all the supporting details, we think you owe us a lot of money. What did we do? We amended our return. We clarified some of the credits that we received. And between that amendment and May, the appeal was assigned. Mr. Tuttle is now part of the, on the other side looking at this. And once that appeal was made, we asked the state to please consider, after the opening brief, our amended returns, which they did. So that's where we are now. Mr. Tuttle has now computed what he thinks we now owe as a penalty. Our 2021 refund, after lots of phone calls and 12 emails, finally got released. So now we're at the point of, what do we really owe now that our amended returns have been reviewed and all the damage is done? But so today, February 20th, 2025, I'm ready to get this behind us. Again, my request for an appeal, request for a waiver of the penalty was that this was not willful intent. It was difficult business environment during COVID, and when those taxes were due, I missed page 63 of my tax return that said I needed to send it in and write a check. And we did undo a lot of hardship by not having that 2021 refund for 2.5 years. And that was tied to this appeal, but I'm not sure why it got held up but why, but it definitely, we've already suffered enough since the state has had that money for that period of time. So that is my presentation on the timeline and the documents to support what's happened. It was super frustrating and super expensive for me just to work through this. But now we are here today, and I'm ready for your decision. What questions do you have?
Thank you, Mr. Wargo. Does the Franchise Tax Board have any questions for Mr. Wargo?
No questions. Thank you.
I go to my co-panelists. Ms. Parker, any questions for Mr. Wargo?
I have no questions at this time.
Okay, Mr. Kim, any questions for Mr. Wargo?
No questions at this time.
Okay, I also have no questions for you, Mr. Walker, at this time. I'm going to let the Franchise Tax Board make their presentation, and if you will please, Mr. Tuttle, please address what the amount at issue is, and answer Mr. Walgo's question about does that $37,178.75 include interest? So go ahead.
Thank you. So to first respond to the outstanding question about the interest, Franchise Tax Board does not have a calculated interest amount to bring to this hearing today, but it is something we can calculate. It's a manual process for us to calculate since interest is ongoing, but we can calculate it and have it be presented in post-hearing briefing. So to my presentation, good afternoon. My name is Topher Tuttle, and I'm representing respondent, the Franchise Tax Board. With me is Maria Brosterhouse, also representing respondent. At issue is whether appellant has demonstrated reasonable cause to abate the delinquent filing penalty. In this case, appellant did not file a group tax return for tax year 2020 on behalf of its shareholders until January 15th, 2022. The original group tax return reflected total tax of about $240,000. Appellant filed an amended tax return on May 22nd, 2023, which reflected a lower total tax of about $220,000. However, appellant only made timely tax payments totaling $72,000. Since the group tax return was due by May 17th, 2021, but was not filed until January 15th, 2022, respondent properly imposed a delinquent filing penalty at the maximum rate of 25% because the tax return was more than 5 months late. However, based on appellant's amended return, the amount of the delinquent filing penalty has been reduced to about $37,000. A taxpayer has the burden of proof to show that reasonable cause exists to support abatement of the delinquent filing penalty. To establish reasonable cause, appellant must demonstrate that the failure to timely file occurred despite the exercise of ordinary business care and prudence. In this case, appellant admits that due to an oversight, the California group tax return for tax year 2020 was not filed contemporaneously with the timely filed federal and Maryland state tax returns. Unfortunately, an oversight or appellant's lack of due diligence is not a basis for granting relief from the penalty. Thus, appellant has failed to demonstrate it exercised ordinary business care and prudence, and thus has not demonstrated reasonable cause to abate the delinquent filing penalty. Since appellant has failed to establish reasonable cause, FTB's denial of appellant's claim for refund should be sustained. I'm happy to answer any questions the panel may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tuttle. Ms. Parker, any questions for the Franchise Tax Board?
No, I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kim, any questions for the Franchise Tax Board?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Tuttle, something really quick. The 37,178 and 75 cents, that's just the penalty itself, correct?
Correct.
And so any interest would be on top of that.
Yes.
And of course, that interest, if the impact automation prevails, would be in addition to the 37,178 and would be paid back to impact automation if it prevails.
So I will say that the outstanding balance, this is something FTB could respond to an additional briefing post hearing if
Right.
desired. Although I think procedurally there's an issue here that the claim denial was issued before the revised penalty amount of 65,000 was issued. And so the claim denial may have been on an amount that had not yet been paid. And so even though this is a claim for refund action, it may not have been paid in full. And that's something FTB could address in briefing if requested by OTA.
Okay, now you are confused me. So is the proper amount dispute the 65,000 that you're talking about, or the 37,000 that?
So the part that's improper here is the amount that may have been paid or not. That's something FTB I cannot answer as we speak here now. What the penalty, the original penalty amount was $65,000, but that's not that was the amount at issue when this case was appealed, is $65,000, and FTB's position is that based on the amended tax return, it should be reduced to $37,000. That should be the amount of the delinquent filing penalty.
Okay.
The reason interest is still accruing, even though this is a claim for refund action, is that the claim denial was issued prior to the calculation of the $65,000 penalty. So if you looked at the notices presented by appellant, there was a notice that said the balance due was $14,000, and that's the amount that the appellant paid and then filed a claim for refund. But all of that occurred before FTB had calculated the delinquent filing penalty amount of $65,000. I'm sorry to muddy all of the issues.
That's
It
not
is-
correct. I'm sorry.
Oh, just hold on there. You,
Okay.
Mr. Walgo, you'll get your chance when you do your rebuttal. So I just want to have Mr. Tuttle focus on exactly what we're talking about here. I remember the briefing said the amount in controversy is 37,178 and 75 cents.
Yes, for the penalty amount. Correct.
Yes, that's the only issue is the penalty amount. And
Yes.
that's just pure penalty, the 25% of whatever taxes owed on the late filing, that's the 37,178.75.
Correct.
Okay. Now, regardless of whatever 65,000, that number really is not relevant here. And you can correct me if I'm wrong in this assumption, because that's not the amount in controversy. You've agreed that the penalty is 37,000.
Yes.
Okay, and that's what the taxpayer has already paid. Or no?
That That is a question that I cannot answer until we've done a further analysis of the amounts at issue.
Okay,
It
so,
is not clear to me that the taxpayer has paid the full amount of the penalty.
so you allow this claim to go and issue the denial notice and treat it as a claim, even though the taxpayer has not met the full payment requirement.
That I cannot answer. That would require further development.
Okay, so could you answer me, and I'm sure Mr. Walker wants to know the answer to this question, why did he get a bill for 14,000 and not 37,000?
That accounting is something that FTB would like to address in further briefing. Because
Okay,
I cannot explain it at this time.
okay, Mr. Walker, I see you start your screen sharing, so I guess you're raring to go. aren't
No,
you?
so, I mean,
Go ahead.
so the state sent me a notice on 7/12 that said the penalty was 65,000.
Hmm.
Which was 7/12, the penalty is 65,000. Then on 9/7, they sent me the penalty of 35,000. But I had overpaid my tax. So my $14,000 payment that went into the state covered the balance due, which included my interest and my penalty at that time. So since then, and that's what I made my appeal off of. Since then, the numbers are different. Certain credits were not allowed or allowed through the amended return. But I mean, this record showed that I paid $239 and that I paid this balance of 14,000. If you want to run a statement of my account, I paid both of these numbers. So
Okay, Mr. Walker, I just want to remind you again that if you don't want certain confidential information to be shared over the air, you need to watch what you're showing on your screen. So just a reminder for you. Okay. So let me get this straight, Mr. Well, you got your bill for 14 grand. You got overpaid your taxes, so you figure with your overpayment and the 14,000, you fulfilled whatever the 35,000 that franchise tax board finally sent you. Now, did the amended return get filed after the 14,000 was paid in? Is that what happened?
that's correct.
So then the amended return gets filed, and then franchise tax board makes more adjustments, and they come up with another number.
That's right.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Walker. Is it your position that the penalty can be no more than the 37,178?
I think both of us agree that it can be no more than that number.
Mr. Tuttle, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so whatever adjustments come out of that amended return, the penalty is going to be 37,178.75 cents plus interest.
Correct.
Okay. And Mr. Walker, the overpayment you had, was it approximately 21,000? I mean, you're saying 14,000 and the bill was for about, 35 grand. So I'm doing very rough math, 35 minus 14. So with the overpayment would have been 21,000. Is that about right?
So this statement had a balance due, yeah, that's correct, of 21, well, it's probably 24,000 because it included the interest, maybe 25,000.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, I'm going to my co-panelist, Ms. Parker. Do you have any questions for the parties?
I would like to ask FTB a quick question regarding that original $65,000 penalty that was assessed. Is it fair to say, when I review the exhibits that were provided, it appears that an original $72,000 payment was not applied to their account. So that's what triggered the higher $65,000 original penalty. But after some phone calls that we can see in, I think it was in some logs, or somehow it did get resolved, and that's what lowered it to a $35,000 penalty. Is that correct?
That is part of it, yes. So the original $65,000 penalty was calculated on unpaid tax, which included basically two large adjustments. One is the 72,000 tax payments that were later credited to appellant's account. The other was a research credit that had been claimed on the original return but was denied. In the amended return, that research credit has, FTB has accepted it as reported on the amended return. So those two adjustments are what lowered the amount of unpaid tax as shown on the amended return.
And that $72,000 payment is being considered timely. It looked like it was maybe it was credited to the wrong account. Is that accurate?
The payment has been correctly applied and is considered timely, which is why the penalty amount, that's part of why the penalty amount has been reduced.
Okay, and then the final amended return that we now have that you've accepted that has generated the $37,000 penalty, that was submitted after the appeal started?
Correct.
And it increased, it was the taxpayer self-reported an increased tax liability.
The amended return had about $20,000 decreased tax liability from the original return.
Yet the penalty was higher.
The penalty calculated on the amended tax return is lower.
When you originally adjusted the penalty amount to 35,000, that notice that was dated September 12th says that the tax was 214,000.
That is
then-
before the amended return.
Yes, and that's what that 35,000 penalty was based off of. And then the amended return, unless I'm looking at the wrong amended return, I'm looking at Exhibit K. Is that not the amended return?
That is the amended return.
Okay, and on that one, the total tax is 220, so it went up. Did it not?
So
Oh, the research credits, that's the part you're talking
there
about.
were two
So-
large adjustments.
So the unpaid tax went down
Yes.
after all of your, okay, thank you, that clarifies that in my head.
Judge Kim, questions for either party?
I have no questions to add. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to this amended return. So it sounds like, Mr. Tuttle, that the franchise tax board has not finished going through the amended return and figure out what the final penalty should be. Does that sound about right?
I'm sorry if I've misrepresented that earlier. The franchise tax board has accepted the amounts reported on the amended tax return for purposes of this appeal, and in our reply brief, we calculated the penalty that is due based on the figures in that amended tax return. The $37,000 penalty is what FTB sees as the correct amount of penalty based on the most, the latest information in that amended tax return.
And that's pure penalty, there's no
That's
interest.
only penalty that does not reflect the interest.
So I think I'm maybe circling back to Ms. Parker's question. If the amended return resulted in a reduction of tax, and the original notices stated that the penalty was about 35 grand, wouldn't that 35 grand be reduced because of the amended return?
And that's the issue that FTB would like to address, is the accounting of each of those notices and when they, remember, there are two large adjustments that happened in the interim. We have the $72,000 payment that was reported on the original return, but FTB did not immediately apply. That was corrected and later applied, which reduced the penalty. Then there was a research credit on the original return that was denied, but not fully substantiated. That was corrected in the amended tax return. So there are several steps in the interim between the original filing and the amended tax return that changed the numbers that are showing on these notices. So the largest amount of the delinquent filing penalty was the $65,000. At one period, that was the amount of the penalty. Based on all of the changes that have happened between the beginning and end of, the original return and the amended tax return, the current amount of the penalty based on the latest numbers is the $37,000 amount.
Okay. And how much time do you anticipate you will need before you can provide OTA with final numbers?
So the numbers at issue that we've discussed are the final numbers. What is not final is what the snapshot was at the time each notice was issued. We don't have a clear chart that shows why the 35,000 showed in the September 12th notice and why in the July notice there was a 65,000. It's those snapshots are the ones that we don't have a clear reconciliation for in the record. The current record is complete for the final numbers. We know that the appellant and FTB both recognize that the amended return is correct, and we're going to calculate the penalty based on the amended return figures. So that means the only issue remaining is whether the delinquent filing penalty was properly imposed based on the late filed original tax return, and the amount of the penalty, both parties agree, is no more than the $37,000 amount we've discussed.
Okay, but if the amount should turn out to be less based on your analysis post-hearing, then you would have to refund some of that back to the taxpayer off that 37,000,
So
correct?
Again, I'm sorry if I'm not explaining. The 37,000 is the final number. That is not going to change. FTB stands by its position that it is properly calculated the delinquent filing penalty at that $37,000 amount. What may not be clear in the record is why there were different penalty amounts at different stages of the appeal. When the notices were issued, in the record, there are different penalty amounts, and it would take more analysis to explain why it was 65,000 for a while. Why was it 37,000 or 35,000 a year? That could still be reconciled, but it is not germane to the ultimate decision. Is we have the correct penalty in front of us now.
We can decide among ourselves and among the panel members what is germane or not germane to
Sure,
us.
yes.
But going back to one of my original questions, how much time would you need to reconcile?
FTB could have a full accounting within 30 days.
Okay. Mr. Wargo, do you have anything you wish to add?
Just a couple things.
Yes.
There was a point that California said my taxes and my research credits were acceptable. In September of 2022, you sent me a notice that said, here's the tax you owed. And you accepted that credit. Later on, in 2023, you decided not to accept the credit. So when the notices came out, you had accepted the credit. Later on, you did not accept the credit. So there was a point where you said, hey, that part of my taxes is fine. The second thing, like, if the clock is running and I owe money to you guys, and I'm getting charged interest and penalties for late, I mean, you've had my amended tax return for almost 2 years. You should send me something that says, here's what I owe, here's the interest. At least the juice, the interest would stop running. I'd write you guys a check. And in our pre-hearing appeal, our pre-hearing meeting, I asked for the interest. You requested that he get it. Now I gotta wait another 30 days and incur more interest. I don't understand why that's not here. Why don't I have that? What's my balance due right now? I don't think that's,
Well,
I
Mr.
don't think that's
Wargo,
right.
if I may alleviate your concern, this is a refund claim, so any interest that accrues will be going back to you. You would not be charged anymore because you've
I have
paid it.
no idea what my balance is on my account.
Well, Mr. Tuttle, does he still owe you guys money?
That's the question that I can't answer. I don't know. Based on the timing of the notices at the time that he paid the 14,000 and we issued a claim for refund denial, I would that's what remains unknown to me, is that this has been paid in full. It without that accounting.
Okay.
I still don't understand how I called in October of 2022 saying, please refund my 2021 tax returns, how this got muddied where that couldn't get released because of my appeal or my denial. Once the denial was done, once you denied my claim in December, why didn't you release me my money? Why did it take 2.5 years for that to happen?
Mr. Wago, the 2021 year is not in front of us, so that's something that you might want to pick up with the advocate at Franchise Tax Board. But at this point, we're concerned with the 2020 year. And I think at this point, I'm going to go back and discuss further with my co-panelists. I think we're going to keep the record open. At least in my mind, if not in the minds of my co-panelists, we're thinking of a additional briefing, 30 days for Franchise Tax Board, 30 days for you to reply, Mr. Wargo, and then 30 days for Franchise Tax Board if they want to reply to that. We will let you folks know after we deliberate after this hearing what our plans are. At this point, I'm not confident that we have a complete record and at least what the amount is, what the status is for this case. So I am gonna hold this hearing open, hold the record open, and we will be adjourned, and we will get back to you with written order, letting you folks know whether the record has been closed so we can make a decision, or we keep the record open and ask for additional briefing. Any other concerns, Mr. Wargo?
I run a business. I've got 50 employees. This is not what I do for a living. I want to get this behind me.
Understood. Mr. Tuttle, any questions for us?
No, thank you.
Okay, we are adjourned, and I don't believe there are any more cases this afternoon. So OTA will get back to the parties with additional with a correspondence to follow. Thank you.